Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In a remote corner of the private airport of Van Nuys, as the city of Los Angeles began to wake up under a still, sleepy gray sky, Nathaniel Nate Brooks wiped his oil-stained hands with a ragged rag. He was 5:42 a.m., and his night shift was coming to an end. The hangar's fluorescent lights cast a harsh light on the gleaming fuselage of the business jets, frozen in golden silence. Nate, 38 years old, had worked there for 12 years. A respected aircraft mechanic, he didn't make waves. He was the kind of man you remember after the fact. Efficient, precise, discreet, no idle chatter. No selfies in cockpits. Just respect for a profession he practiced with a keen, almost religious awareness. Tall, robust, dark skin marked by the sun and fatigue, he had a calm gaze, both distant and attentive. His hands, large, strong, worn, spoke for him. They had repaired noisy engines at 3 a.m., greased landing gear in the rain, and saved more than one VIP flight from cancellation. Nate lived alone in a modest apartment in Inglewood. Far from the luxury of the jets he pampered every night. Every day, he drove through L.A. in his battered old Ford F-150, headphones on, listening to jazz or interviews with NASA engineers. He never complained. He had learned, early on, that the world made no room for men like him unless they earned it, screw or mortar after screw. His passion for aviation dates back to his childhood. His father, Cornelius Brooks, a decorated former U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, had nurtured in him a love of the sky. Nate was 10 years old when he last saw his father, a flag-draped coffin, a military salute, tears choked back with pride. If you can't fly the planes, make sure they fly because of you. That was what his father had said to him one day, sitting with him on the roof of the house, watching a plane cross the pink evening sky. Nate had kept that phrase in his pocket, like a silent prayer. That morning, as he was finally about to take off his gloves, a voice crackled over the speakers. Private jet grounded at Hangar C3. Immediate diagnostics required. High priority. He closed his eyes for a moment. Sighed. Another emergency for a billionaire in a hurry. He put his gloves back on, grabbed his toolbox without a word, and walked toward Hangar C3, the soles of his boots echoing on the concrete. Hangar C3 was buzzing with activity. A squadron of runway technicians, ground handlers, and suited assistants were reviewing their tablets, phones, and nerves. At the center of this controlled chaos stood Madison Hale, 41 years old, elegant silhouette in a suit Armani Blanc, hair tied back in a strict bun, and sunglasses that she hadn't yet removed despite the indoor light. She looked like she'd stepped straight out of a glossy magazine, except that her gaze, icy and piercing, betrayed a character forged in the steel of the business world. Madison wasn't just rich. She was powerful. PDG at Hale Tech, a company at the forefront of artificial intelligence. It represented the new elite, visionary, feared, unattainable. Tokyo was waiting for it to sign a colossal strategic partnership. But there, its jet Gulfstream G650, the pride of his private fleet, refused to start. She stared at the device as if she were going to force it to reboot by sheer willpower. "Where's the mechanic?" she growled. "I don't pay for these kinds of unexpected events. Get someone to come. Anyone. But quickly." And that's when Nate walked in. No announcement. No flashy badge. He arrived with his toolbox and his calm gaze. He stopped a few feet from the jet, scanned the aircraft and the scene around him. Then he approached the pilot for a quick exchange. "Are you in error 2312? "Yeah. The central hydraulic system refuses to align. We tried 2 resets. Nothing. Let me take a look at it." Madison, who had been preoccupied with shouting at her assistants, finally turned her head towards him. The contrast was striking. He, dressed in overalls that were a little too large, his sleeves rolled up, his skin marked with oil stains and the fatigue of the night shift in his shoulders. She, statuesque, impeccable, every detail of her outfit exuding fortune and absolute control. She stared at him for a moment, as if hesitating to speak to him. Then, in a dry voice, "Are you the mechanic?" "Yes, ma'am. Nate Brooks. I'm going to need 30 minutes. While others might have trembled in the face of urgency or sought to impress with technical language or a false air of confidence, Nate remained unflappable. He didn't live for looks, much less for flattery. In these situations, he was one with the machine. He listened to the hum of the system, observed the micro-indicators, touched the circuits as one listens to a heartbeat, with the precision of a surgeon and the attention of a man who knew the value of every second. His hands, calloused but steady, moved with fascinating fluidity. Beside him, a young assistant didn't even dare breathe. Madison, standing a few feet away, arms crossed over her immaculate suit, watched the scene. At first, she saw Nate as just another anonymous employee, one more figure in the world of services she consumed without thinking. But as the minutes passed, she felt a change. There was a presence about this man that commanded respect. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make multiple gestures. He was there, grounded, focused, and terribly efficient. She moved slightly closer, driven by a curiosity she couldn't immediately explain. It wasn't just the calm he exuded, or even the quiet assurance of his gestures. It was this total lack of need to please, this implicit refusal to be impressed, even by her. 35 minutes later, Nate straightened up and wiped his hands on a clean rag. He approached Madison unhurriedly. "It was an overheating in the hydraulic control circuit," he said calmly. "A slightly cracked part caused an imbalance in the flow. If you had taken off like that, the pressure would have been released in flight. You were lucky. I replaced it. Full test performed. You can take off again." He didn't seek her gaze, didn't wait for her reaction. He delivered the diagnosis like an honest doctor, without embellishment. Madison stared at him, this time truly. She saw his tired but clear eyes, his strong arms, and that face marked by years of effort. He wasn't smiling at her. He wasn't searching for anything. And in his world, that was rare. Priceless. "Thanks, Nate," she said in a breath she could no longer control. "With pleasure, Mrs. Hale," he replied simply, before putting away his tools. She boarded the jet, followed by her team. But just as she was about to disappear behind the door, she stopped, turned around, and almost in spite of herself said, "Tell me, do you have dinner plans tonight?" He looked up at her, surprised but impassive. She, on the other hand, sensed something new. She had just proposed dinner, not to a business associate, an investor, or a courtier, but to a man she knew nothing about, except that he possessed the two things she had always sought: competence and honesty. That evening, in an unassuming restaurant in Santa Monica, just yards from the ocean, Madison and Nate sat at a dimly lit table facing the waves. The contrast was still there. She, elegant, surrounded by that natural magnetism that powerful people possess. He, in a carefully ironed light-colored shirt, his shoulders straight, his gestures simple. But at that table, statuses faded. It was no longer the Hale-Tech heiress and the Inglewood mechanic. It was two naked souls. They talked about their fathers, about the silence that premature grief leaves in a life. Nate recalled childhood mornings spent watching planes take off in the distance, dreaming of approaching one, if only once. Madison spoke of her loneliness as a child prodigy, raised in the halls of power, where every smile was a calculation. "People all want something from me," she whispered. "A signature, a favor, an entry into my world. But you just wanted to fix what was broken." Nate looked down for a moment. He wasn't used to such transparency. He nodded slowly. "I learned to expect nothing, and to make things fly, even when it seems impossible." Then, after a silence, "I never thought I was worthy, of a woman like you." She slowly reached out her hand, brushing his with unexpected gentleness. "You don't have to feel inferior," she said softly. He looked her straight in the eyes, and for the first time, he smiled. "And you don't need to be alone to protect yourself," he replied. In that look, there was no challenge, no demand. Just a simple truth, laid there between them, like an anchor. The waiter brought the wine, but they didn't need alcohol. That evening, they were already drunk, from this improbable encounter that had just, slowly, changed their trajectories. Weeks turned into months. What had started as a simple dinner between two people from opposite ends of the world quickly became a media story. The paparazzi began tracking their every move. A stolen photo of them on a beach, a knowing glance exchanged in a discreet cafe, was enough to set social media ablaze. The Billionaire and the Mechanic. A title that came back like a mocking or tender refrain, depending on the tone. Some were amused by it, calling it a romantic fantasy. Others, touched, saw it as a modern fable about love beyond social class. But behind the screens, the reality was more stark. Madison lost partnerships. Luxury brands worried that her image was becoming too accessible. At some business dinners, she felt smiles freeze, glances slide toward her with polite condescension. "You might be confusing your position, Madison," a communications consultant told him. "My heart doesn't need to position itself," she had replied curtly. For his part, Nate, who had always lived in the shadows, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. He received anonymous letters full of racist hatred and social contempt. "You shouldn't besmirch his name. You're just a local mechanic." But other messages, sometimes handwritten, moved him to tears. "You give me hope. My daughter dreams of becoming a mechanical engineer. Thank you for showing that it's possible. I grew up in the Bronx. I cried reading your story. Hang in there." Despite the pressure, Madison and Nate held firm. Their bond, forged in simplicity and truth, withstood the media storms. They decided not to justify anything, to simply live. And then, one spring morning, on the same tarmac where it all began, Madison arrived alone. She was wearing a cream coat, no makeup, her hair tied back in a ponytail. Nate was repairing a small touring plane when she approached. He looked up, surprised to see her there, without a bodyguard, without a team. She stopped right in front of him, staring into his. Then, without a word, she got down on her knees. She opened a small box containing a simple, sleekly designed ring made of brushed titanium. "Nate Brooks," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You fixed more than just my jet. You fixed my heart. Do you want to be my husband?" The silence on the tarmac was total, almost sacred. Even the wind seemed to stop. Nate, taken aback, looked at her for a long time. His heart was pounding, but his gaze was gentle. He gently lifted her up, holding her modestly against him. "I'm not a prince," he said. "I'm not rich. I don't have a yacht or a villa in Bali. I don't care. But I will respect you. Every day of my life. That's all I want," she replied simply. They married 2 weeks later, in a small chapel in Nevada, far from the flashes and glitter. No designer gown, no extravagant ceremony. Just the essentials. Old friends of Nate's, mechanics in oil-stained overalls, a few of Madison's loyal co-workers, and several neighbors from the neighborhood. Real people. People who stand up. Their union generated a lot of ink. Feature articles analyzed this social romance. Independent podcasts told their story with emotion. One committed director even decided to make a documentary about it, simply titled Altitude, which won an award at the Tribeca Film Festival. But they, far from the noise, remained discreet. Nate continued to work a few days a week at the airport, because he liked it, because he needed to keep his feet on the ground. Madison, for her part, founded a unique program, called Horizons, to train young people from disadvantaged neighborhoods in aeronautical careers, with mechanical workshops, scholarships, and company internships. She often said, "This world will need more Nates." And sometimes, when the skies were clear, they took their jet, a plane she steadfastly refused to have anyone but him service. She sat next to him in the cockpit, placing her hand on his as they took off together. Two trajectories, once parallel, now united in a single flight, towards a horizon that they themselves drew.